struggle to go to sleep at night.
Drew stayed on the medication while the family worked with doctors.
Yeah, and the hardest thing for me is that every time that he needed a refill, I'm the one that listens to the pharmacist of all the symptoms that could happen, and suicide was one of them. I'm like, that's not my kid, I mean, he's too happy. There's no way.
But the unimaginable did happen. Drew took his own life on September 19th, 2021. He was 14 and a half years old.
How much do you think the pandemic played a role in his mental health? Was that
90%? I would say 90%.
When we interviewed them on a hazy day outside their home with a view that stretched for miles where Drew loved watching the sunsets, it had only been a year since his death.
That was another sign.
You hold it there for just a sec.
Yep.
So that's our logo that we came up with for our foundation.
In that time and in their grief, Steve and Jenny formed the Drew North.
Welcome to the debate between candidates for Washington Superintendent of Public Instruction. Coming to you live from the Edmonds Center for the Arts in Snohomish County. Brought to you by Seattle City Club. With special thanks to presenting sponsors AARP of Washington and Comcast. An appreciation for our event and venue sponsors, our civic sponsors, and premier media partners. With production support from WV Livestream.
And a good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for being with us tonight. I'm John Hopperstead. Glad to have you. I'm from Fox 13. Glad to have you here for this very important debate tonight. I'm joined by my fellow panelists, Sammy West from KUOW, Venice Buhine from Cascade PBS, and we have Kelly Anna Brooking, our student representative, who is a junior at Hanford High School. Also, please welcome our candidates, Chris Reykdal and David Olson. All right, we're going to be asking a broad range of questions on the issues most impacting students and families today, including questions submitted by the audience. Let's go over the ground rules right now. Each candidate, you're going to have 1 minute for an opening statement. You will then have 45 seconds to answer initial questions. We will then lead a moderated discussion and give 20 seconds for follow-up questions or rebuttals. And then each candidate will end with a 60-second closing statement. Now, we've asked our live audience to remain silent from here on out. Be respectful, no cheers or boos, but you can follow along at home using the hashtag WAElects. Now, we tossed a coin backstage to determine who would make the first opening statement here. David, you won. You elected to go second. So, Chris, you have 60 seconds for your opening statement.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here in the audience and those who are watching. This is an important role and one I'm very proud to serve in. Thank you to our panelists and our hosts. I'm Chris Reykdal, Superintendent of Public Schools for our beautiful state of Washington. I was born and raised right here in Snohomish County, so it's nice to be home and be a part of this. I've spent my entire life serving in public education. It's what I wanted to do as a child. My parents didn't even go to high school. And I realized pretty early on that I needed an education that was going to be impactful to my life, break the cycle of poverty, and really open up doors. And I wanted to deliver that for others because I had these teachers that loved me and believed in me. I've done just about every role in schools. Public school student in Washington, First in my family to go straight to college and a public university in our state. I became a teacher. I've served on a school board. I was a summer custodian even in our schools, scraping off gum off of desks so that school could start in September. I've served in the legislature in this role, foundation roles. This is the most beautiful and powerful thing we do in the state of Washington, is deliver for over 1 million children public education that opens up doors for them. And I'm looking forward to our debate tonight, and I'm grateful that you're here.
All right. Chris, thanks so much. David, you have 60 seconds.
Well, thank you. My name is David Olson, and I'm running for Superintendent of Public Instruction. I want to thank the City Club of Seattle for hosting tonight's debate. I myself am a former president and board member of the City Club of Tacoma. 8 years ago, I was vice president of the City Club of Tacoma, and we hosted a similar debate between then first-time OSPI candidate Chris Reykdal and Aaron Jones. During that debate, he made many promises. Yet here we are 8 years later, and after so many failures, plummeting academic scores, declining student mental health, mismanagement of billions in ESSER funds, overwhelmed teachers, and much more. As an 11-year school board member in a very successful school district, I had no choice but to step up and challenge my opponent. Under his leadership, Washington public school systems are failing students, parents, and teachers. I'm running because your kids and grandkids and our teachers deserve better. Thank you.
All right, let's start off with the budget. Let's get right to the news in education happening right now. Chris, you submitted your budget last week asking for almost $3 billion in additional funding over the next 2 years. The question for you, is that necessary, and what happens if the legislature does not approve it?
Yeah, thank you. It's the fundamental question of our time. Our paramount duty in the state of Washington is basic education. It's the number one thing our legislature is asked to do by our Constitution. And as a constitutional officer with a statutory requirement to submit budgets every year, we've submitted a budget that will close gaps, will continue to close gaps. Now, we submitted a budget that we think makes a huge difference for students with disabilities, the transportation shortfall, supports educators, paraeducators, and does more than that. It's the paramount duty. And unfortunately, in our state's history, our legislature has been brought to court 3 times by the state Supreme Court when they don't fund it. I think they're going to lean into it. I think they understand the challenge. I have high confidence in all 4 caucuses to make this a priority, both Democrats and Republicans, in a bipartisan way. And we're going to continue to advocate because we have the research and the data and the understanding to know what closes gaps and helps kids. And we'll let the courts decide if there's more steps after that.
So if they do, a follow-up question, if they don't approve it, this is going to the courts, or what's your avenue here?
I think it's been the only avenue when basic education has not been funded in the past. We just saw that 10 or 12 years ago. It's what boosted $4.5 billion, allowed us to do all-day kindergarten, to add more than $1 billion to support students with disabilities. Our legislature deserves great credit for what they've done, but the job was to keep up with it, and inflation has eaten up school budgets. So I think there's a possibility that there's a legal risk here if basic ed is not funded in the next session.
Okay. David, your take.
One of the things that Chris and I do agree on is that the state is not meeting its constitutional duty to fund basic ed, and specifically special ed and transportation are really hurting our schools. Although I appreciate the superintendent's budget, I believe that it's just a Band-Aid, a $3 billion stopgap. And until we fix the current prototypical funding model, which is inequitable about how they fund schools, primarily by zip code, until we fix that, our rural school districts and high poverty school districts are being left behind. Because of it, the achievement gap is widening, especially among students of color, especially Black, Native American, and Latino, and students with disabilities. They're getting left behind, and we need to work to fix that.
So as you both were saying, you both believe the state isn't fulfilling its paramount duty to fully fund education. David, you've said you want to overhaul the state's funding formula. And Chris, you've said you want to be sure the state is spending more overall on education. At the same time, the state superintendent is in many ways a bully pulpit with limited powers. If elected, what would your approach be? And I'll start with you, David.
Well, earlier this week, Superintendent Reykdal was on King 5 or the news said that he won't take no for an answer for getting his budget through this year. But I would argue that he hadn't gotten yeses in the past. And so I agree, Superintendent of Public Instruction does have a bully pulpit, and I think it needs to be utilized more actively in the state legislature, and if necessary, as what happened, like he said, 15 years ago, go back to the state Supreme Court. I don't think it needs to be done that way. But what happened with the McCleary decision 12 years ago or so. They did it in a vacuum, and they did not collaborate with school superintendents, school boards, or CFOs. And if I get elected, I'm going to make sure that we bring the stakeholders together to do it right this time.
Chris.
Well, I'd say the role of the superintendent is to bring the research case, what's working, what's not working, then build a budget. That is what the law entails us to do, building the coalition, which we've done. And in the time that I've been superintendent, we now deliver 1 million books to children before they even begin kindergarten. And we just saw the best kindergarten readiness scores we've seen in 6 or 7 years. We've now got assessment gains in math in particular growing. We are, in fact, closing gaps in graduation. 50,000 kids are in dual language. A third of our students by middle school take a high school course. 2/3 of our high school graduates leave with college credit. All of this work started with budget requests from my office and building coalitions and partners. So I agree it's a bully pulpit, but it's one that brings to bear a lot of research and has to be the voice of these amazing young people and their parents. And that's the job. And that's the beauty of my background in public finance and public education is I know how to do it because we've been doing it and we've added $5 billion. We're just short of the actual constitutional goal now.
Okay. Shifting now to struggling school districts, some districts in our state are having to make severe budget cuts, like Seattle, which is facing a nearly $100 million hole, and they're considering closing schools. The Marysville School District is in such dire financial straits that it could be dissolved. Should the state take a more active role in preventing situations like this? And Chris, you can start.
Yeah, thank you. The most active situation the state could take is to fully fund basic education. In all those cases, those districts have seen an enormous erosion of their buying power due to inflation. And when you have an obligation to teach young people as the constitutional duty and you lean into that passion, you need highly qualified educators. Our educators are the best in the country and they deserve every dime, including our paraeducators, our custodians, and our staff. But we're now $1 billion behind where we were in 2019 adjusted for inflation. So that's why I argue with all of us in a respectful way. Our first job is to come together as Democrats, Republicans, and nonpartisans, lean into public ed, challenge our legislature to meet their constitutional duty. We have $1 billion need just to get the inflation back, and we wouldn't have a single school district in jeopardy right now in any way had we just maintained inflationary investments over the last 5 years.
David?
Well, one of the things I'm proud of is I've been traveling all around the state, and I've been meeting with teachers that have come up to me and talked to me about the fact that they would have liked to see OSPI under current leadership be more proactive as far as providing oversight and financial guidance, how they spent their ESSER money. A lot of the school districts, the state auditor's office found audit findings because they didn't have proper internal controls on how to spend that critical money during a critical time during COVID. And also, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education found that OSPI during that same time did not provide proper oversight on how the COVID money was spent. So 2 years into COVID, almost $2 billion had not been allocated out across the state to schools that, in my opinion, could have really used that. But the other thing we have to do is we have to give them guidance on how to spend it. Thank you.
Thank you. And a 20-second follow-up, focusing in on Seattle, where as many as 21 public schools could be closed. Some parents and community members there want the state to step in to help prevent such sweeping cuts. Would you push for that as superintendent? And David, we'll start with you.
So I recently spoke to some parents and community members in the Seattle school district boundaries. One of the things they're most complaining about is lack of transparency from their superintendent and their school board. And I think that rather than just jump out and close schools, I think that we could consider turning some of them into community hubs so that members of the community come in, give mentoring and tutoring service to the students.
Okay, thank you so much. Chris?
Of course, we should step in and help, and that's part of what advocacy is. I think the Seattle School District is going to manage as critically as it can, but there's a fundamental lack of funding in basic education that's caused this. And at $1 billion for the state, you would have half of their gap closed just in Seattle alone. My budget request would do that. I have to take exception to what he said. We are the best in the country. We were literally ranked number one this week for the spend of our federal dollars. 96% of them is spent to date. They have until November 15th. We'll be one of the only states that's not asked for an extension.
Okay. David, do you want to elaborate a little bit more on what you said about community centers and schools?
I think that rather than just closing the schools and forcing the students to be bussed out into outside their neighborhood where they know their community, past years Seattle closed schools before, and student enrollment came back, and then they found themselves in a bind. I'd like to see some of those schools be considered for a community hub where members of industry could provide services to help with that so that they could provide tutoring and mentoring service to the students.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hello. Many communities are having trouble reaching that 60% threshold to pass school levies, and levies are failing, which bring a lot of these budget problems to school districts. So is it time for a change? And if so, what are some of your ideas? And David?
Well, the levies need a 50% passing to pass. Bonds require 60%. I know that there's those in the state that have been lobbying to lower that to 50%. I do agree that 60% is very high, but when you're going out for a $500 million or $1 billion bond, that's a big amount of money that you want the majority of the community to support. I support, and I'm on record saying that I support a 55%, but I don't support a 50% because of the amount of money we're asking the community to commit to.
Okay, thank you.
David and I agree on a lot of things. This is one we do not agree on. Constitutional democracy is focused on simple majority. That's the way it is. And right now, our students in rural communities in particular are being harmed because of a 60% supermajority. In a time of a tremendous culture war around the country, it's hard to get to that. But our democratic institutions are founded upon a simple majority. And if our rural districts could get to a 50% for bonds, they would be leveraging tens of millions of dollars for their schools. What's more tragic than just our disagreement on 60%, he's got some arbitrary 55%, I think a simple majority, is he proposes rolling back the capital gains tax. $500 million a year that is funding early learning for 3- and 4-year-olds. And we just saw the best kindergarten readiness scores we've seen in our state in 6 or 7 years. He would also roll back the $300 million that I've advocated for rural schools because of the 60% supermajority. He'd cut the capital gains, hurt construction in rural communities, and pull $500 million away from early learning. There's no solution there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. So actually, one of our audience members actually had a question regarding the capital gains tax. So the capital gains tax sends hundreds of millions of dollars to education a year, and it's on the ballot this November and could be repealed. So if it gets repealed, how do you propose the state address that? And so what are some of the solutions for the districts that would lose that money? So I think it's Chris.
Well, first of all, vote no. Don't repeal it. I understand the question, but it's the only thing we've done to move ourselves from the 50th worst tax state in America for regressivity to the 49th. It's the only thing we've done that has allowed our voters to actually have a sense that the wealthy are paying their fair share, and it funds early learning in K-12 capital construction. If it does fail, we will go right to the legislature and say we will need that money out of the existing capital budget.
Thank you. David?
So, the state legislature, and I've said this before, the state legislature has not been very good at keeping its promises. Years ago, they had a lottery, and they said that the lottery revenue would go to fund education, and that's not happening today. Then, about 12 years ago or so, they had the passed marijuana, and they said the marijuana tax revenue would go to fund education. That's not happening either. It's going into the general fund. So what I said is, I have not said publicly that I don't support or oppose the capital gains. How about we just go back to using marijuana and lottery money to fund schools?
Please let me answer this.
Let's get a rebuttal, Chris.
This is perhaps the most disqualifying thing you say every time we're out on debate. And you know I love and respect you, and I think your character is great in terms of your passion for kids. The lottery and marijuana revenue combined in the state, y'all, is 1% of the state budget. 1%. And the lottery does fully fund education, happens to be higher ed, and marijuana revenue is public health. You all would have to do a lot of habit forming things in order to fund education with that. So let's be honest, capital gains is progressive. These are regressive taxes. They're 1% of the budget. It's not an answer.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's continue talking about funding here and the issue of special education. You know, Washington's legislature has never fully funded special education. That is its mandate. Despite being required by law, they simply haven't done it. So what is your solution about that? And David, let's go first here.
Well, special ed and students with disability is a federal civil right, and the state needs to meet its constitutional duty to fund our most vulnerable students because they are the ones that are, in addition to this, the marginalized students are the ones being left behind. They have more absentee rates. They drop out. We need to get the state to step up. When I talk to superintendents and people around the state, they say the two things that are impacting them the most are special ed funding and transportation. If they could get their hands around that and fund that, schools would be able to hire paraeducators, train those paraeducators to help take the onus off overwhelmed teachers that are in the classroom.
But what do you as superintendent do to convince the legislature to fund special education?
Well, I think that the superintendent has like almost 50% of the state budget goes through OSPI. That's quite a bully pulpit. And I think that the superintendent needs to do more to go meet with the leaders of the state legislature and the governor and convince them that it's time to step up. Our children are the future of this state, and they need to step up. And, you know, just 5 years ago, 52% of the state budget went to education. Today, it's only 43.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
It's more than words, it's action. When I got here, only $1.1 billion a year was funding special education from state sources and about $500 million from federal funds. The feds have barely moved the needle, but we now put $2.2 billion into special education. Our legislature, through partnership with us, bringing them the research and the data, has said that's a worthy investment, and bipartisan support for that has come forward as I've brought those as the #1 priority in my budgets every single year. It's more than that, though, and that's what I love about this question. You can't just do money alone. We've also said you need to change inclusionary practices and train educators. More students with disabilities should get more of their learning time with their peers in gen ed settings and not in isolation. And we've worked on removing those isolation and restraint practices. We've also done an amazing job, I think, in this state, helping our students understand the importance of learning with their peers. It's more than just words, it's action. And my budget that I just released, its biggest priority once more is to finally close the special ed gap.
I want to ask a quick follow-up to both of you on this. So if the legislature does not fund special education, should funding caps then be removed? Chris?
We've advocated every time that we get rid of this cap. This is a federal civil right for students. They are entitled to services when the need is identified. And so we've said remove the cap, fully fund the system. Again, I think it is not only the paramount duty of the state to fund education, I think this has a federal right to it. And ultimately, the legislature is going to have to dig into their existing base budget if they won't focus on revenue and focus on it as a priority. It is the #1 thing they should fund.
David?
Well, again, that's something that we definitely agree on. The current prototypical funding model is not working. We have to go back to the table and rework the way we fund education. And special ed is woefully underfunded. And like I said, we are leaving our most vulnerable behind. And the recent special ed increases a couple years ago were just a drop in the budget. School boards like mine are having to dip into their levy money to pay for special ed, and that should be criminal. We should not be able to do it. The state needs to meet their obligation.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Olson, what policies or initiatives can you bring forward to help support special needs students and special education programs to help them truly succeed?
Well, I think we've sort of talked about that already. I think there's policies in place that the state should be able to just step up and meet. I mean, they're supposed to fully fund special ed right now. I don't think that we need to reinvent the wheel. I think the state just needs to start funding education. But I also want to make sure that if they get that extra increase in spending, that we're giving them guidance on how to spend it. Oftentimes they get a bucket of money and there's like siloed on how they spend it, but they don't get guidance on how. And so if, for instance, they get a bucket for special ed, a bucket for transportation, a bucket for HIMSOC, are they going to spend all of it on special ed, or are they going to spend on transportation? I think we need to make sure that if we're going to give them that money, we need to give them clear guidance on how best to spend it and not leave them to their own devices, which might take them down the wrong path. Thank you.
What initiatives are you hoping to bring forward?
Well, what I want to do is go to the state and say, you need to fully fund education. That's all, not that it needs to be a new initiative. It needs to be the state meeting their constitutional duty. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to use a bully pulpit for OSPI that I do not believe has been used effectively in the past to get them to do their duty. I don't believe, other than getting the people around the state to step up, go to school board meetings and demand full funding, school boards and local districts should not be using levy money to pay for special ed. That's an initiative. We need to stop doing that.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Reykdal.
Yeah, well, I agree. Obviously, the legislature needs to step in and finish the job. They have done a lot of investment. It's doubled under the time I've been superintendent. We have $700 million to go. The initiatives for me are putting the budget request forward, but then talking about the innovation of classroom experiences. It's about students, not just the esoteric budgets and policy conversations. It's about getting them inclusionary practices. It's about having high expectations for all kids, using AI-based software to help in reading skills that now gives our educators unbelievable real-time feedback. Those are tangible things that make a change. And as we've done that, we've moved the graduation rate in this state since I've been superintendent for students with disabilities up 12 percentage points. It's the fastest growing group, even as they're taking more math, science, and English language arts in high school. High expectations for all kids, high supports for students with disabilities, and as much inclusion as we can. Those are tangible things we're doing, and we should keep expanding them.
Thank you.
I just want to say that without the funding, you can't hire additional special ed paraeducators and take that extra workload off of teachers. That they are telling me across the state they are overwhelmed. And if you look at the Edmonds School District or the Seattle Public School District, they're doing fairly well as far as certain areas. But if you do a deep dive and look where special needs students are, they're woefully behind.
Chris, if you want to add something to this, we give you an extra 20 seconds.
Yeah, that's why my budget request that I just put out builds on the $72 million we secured last year for paraeducators. This is another place where we agree they play such a key role alongside certificated teachers. Some of our students with disabilities get a lot of their instructional time, one-on-one time, and small group time with our paraeducators. We got them the first $72 million investment in a long time. I have a $500 million request going forward. They are a key part of learning.
Thank you. Shifting gears now, Chris, you're asking the public for a third term, but you've been criticized for not making enough progress for Washington students, with only about 40% on track for college-level math and science, according to the last Washington State Schools report card prepared by your office. Why should voters give you a third term? Would you do anything differently to earn their vote?
Well, this is an entirely a system about student achievement, so I appreciate the criticism, and it should continue to fall on anyone in this role. I think the truth is we have standards that are designed backwards from university admissions without needing remedial support. And we've got 50 or 60% of our kids in ELA and a little bit less than that in mathematics. The really cool part is we use the most rigorous test in the country. So we're very critical of ourselves, and we rattle off these numbers. And yet 80+% of kids who get the highest score go to college, 70% of kids who get the second highest score go to college. Even the kids who he calls not proficient yet, half of them go to college, and 70% of them are retained from first year to second year. So we have been moving the needle. Highest graduation rate in our state's history with more math and science and ELA, advanced coursework for kids. We've doubled the number of kids in high cap programs. The test is one measure of system direction. It does not measure each child, and that has been the failure of this testing regime. We have moved kids fundamentally in the state.
Yeah. David, what is the first thing you'd change if elected to office?
Well, I think absolutely we need to make sure that the state is funding the schools, right? I want to take the onus off of local levies, but I also want to give more local control to the school districts. Right now, I don't believe they're getting enough opportunity to make local decisions based on what their communities need. And I also want to give more local control to the teachers so that they know how to run their classrooms. They're telling me across the state that they are getting so many policies and procedures and assessments that are placed on them. It's taken away from their time to instruct the kids, and they're putting the kids onto digital devices rather than be able to have one-on-one and develop a relationship with those students, which I think is super important.
Thank you.
Okay, on to academic success. So 4th and 8th grade math and reading scores have declined nationwide in the past decade, and Washington is no exception, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress. So this has been a national pattern since 2013, so we can't blame it on the pandemic. What is the cause of this decline, and what would you, as state superintendent, do to reverse it? So, David?
Well, this one is clear. The public has lost their faith in our school systems. We've lost 60,000 students out of our public education system since Superintendent Reykdal has taken over, and that's because they don't have faith that we're going to give them a quality education. Many teachers are telling, yes, ma'am?
Oh, so what would you, the question is, what would you do as superintendent?
I think that we need to provide more oversight and go meet with them in their place, the teachers and the superintendents, and find out what's not working. Giving more money to schools isn't going to be the cause. We need to help. We need to find out what the root cause is, why these schools that are getting so much more money today than they did 10 years ago, and they're still not hitting 30% ELA reading and math criteria. We need to find out what's the root cause of why it's not working. That's the most important thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, contextualize those scores. That's the only national assessment that we give in the country. It's a sampling methodology. And the really cool part about our state, even though the entire country has struggled over the last 12 years, at exactly the year that the smartphone became a device that a majority of our students in middle school and high school took, that had with them, that is exactly the year that the decline in reading occurred. We have been outperforming that, thankfully, though. When I started this, there were many, many states ahead of us. Today, there are only 6 states ahead of us, maybe it's 7, in mathematics by 8th grade using that assessment, that are statistically outperforming us. And there are only 2 in reading. So while the whole country has struggled with this, I'm glad that we've made progress against those other states. The number one thing we have to do in reading is transfer screen time back to complex textbook time. We are working on a comprehensive set of learning standards changes that really doubles down on the idea that kids need to get back to old school reading of text and less screen time.
Thank you. And we've got a question, a follow-up from our audience. They want to hear specifically what you two plan to do to help students who are still struggling with pandemic-era learning loss. And I guess, David?
Well, one of the things that we absolutely need to do is we need to make sure that we're giving additional resources for mentoring and tutoring. If you look, like I said, if you look at these school districts and you see there's this disparity in this widening achievement gap between students of color and students with disability, we have to make sure that we're directing additional resources into those schools to help lift up those struggling students. And one thing I'm going to reach back is I do disagree about where we are with the NAEP nationally, but thank you.
All right, thank you. Chris?
It's about interventions and support and tailored learning. This always comes back to the budget. If you want individualized learning for students, you've got to invest in lower class sizes. You've got to invest in paraeducators and have support systems. We've done that with one-time federal money. Again, we're the best in the country at spending that down. That is going away. That's why 2 years ago I said to the legislature, you've got a big problem coming if you don't invest now. They punted a little bit. This is the year to make those investments and then tailor the learning to each student as if every student needed an individualized plan. We are on the cusp of that.
Thank you.
Can I add just one thing? 10 seconds?
20 seconds.
One of the things I'm really proud of, a year and a half ago, our school district was one of the first in the states to restrict cell phones. Has had a very positive impact on mental health and has improved our academic scores.
And we are going to get to cell phones in just a moment.
Okay.
Kellyanna.
Mr. Reykdal, recruiting and retaining the best teachers is integral to helping all students succeed. How will you make sure that there are teachers from all different backgrounds to match the diversity of the student population?
I love the question. When I started in this, there were only about 11 or 12% of our new teachers who were teachers of color. Today, almost 30% of our new teachers are teachers of color. That isn't by accident. Intentional recruitment, and a huge thank you to our higher ed institutions. We've also created innovative ways to become teachers. We have a lot of paraeducators that are very diverse and they're multilingual. They're such a rich source of talent in our communities. We've created a pathway partnering with labor and a real apprenticeship-like model to allow those folks, particularly if they already have a bachelor's degree, to then get the teaching credential and get their own classroom. So this has been very intentional work. We also have a mentorship program when teachers start, and so thankfully, as we've recruited more diverse teachers, they're being retained at the same rate because of very intentional mentorship. He called DEI awful stuff. We lean into it because diversity is strength.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Olson.
So what I absolutely believe is that the schools need to reflect the students and the teachers. So if the demographic is high students of color, then there needs to be teachers of students of color. When I was in Central Washington talking to the Latino community, they said that they're having an issue with communication. And the reason for that is they don't have enough teachers that speak Spanish. So in that case, the DEI issue there as far as diversity and equity would be making sure that we have teachers that can speak Spanish. How about we give incentives to the teachers that don't speak Spanish to learn Spanish, or incentivize teachers that do speak Spanish to transfer into that school district to help those schools so that the Latino-speaking students aren't pushed into one school or one classroom with only one teacher that speaks Spanish. So I agree that we need to make sure that the teachers reflect the students.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you
you
so much. I want to move to curriculum here. One of the pet peeves that people who graduated from school 20 years ago share with kids who are currently in school, including my 15-year-old at Bothell High School, is that schools are not teaching enough life skills like financial literacy or investing. So should this be a bigger focus on preparing students for these important topics, not just for higher education, getting kids ready for college, but teaching them about how to get through life? And if so, how would you incorporate this into schools? And David, let's start with you.
I think that's an excellent question, and I think that all school districts, our school district does teach how to balance checkbook, and we have junior achievement where they go up and they go to this place up in Auburn, finance center, and they get given you're a single mom with 3 kids and a $50,000 income, and how are you going to do your budget? And they give them these life scenarios, so they have to work through that. I'd like to see all school districts do something like that so that kids graduate with just basic understanding of how to do a budget. When I was a kid, we had home ec. You could take home ec, you could learn to cook, you could learn to sew, things like that. Also, I want to make sure that we're expanding the skilled trades across the state so that kids can get a functional skill whenever they get out of high school, that even if they go into college or military or something like that, at least they have a life skill, know how to change a tire on their car. So.
Thank you so much. Chris?
We've consumed too much of a student's high school credits with mandates and requirements, mostly from the State Board of Education, and they're very caring individuals, but they've taken mandates from the legislature and they've piled on more things. And while I've supported the 3rd credit of math, with about 35% of our economy needing a baccalaureate degree, it means 65 to 70% of students need more than a high school diploma, but less than a bachelor's degree. And the 3rd credit of math for those students should be real world contemporary math, financial literacy. It can be mathematics and the trades that's applied. We have a system, though, that quite frankly gets targeted if they don't drive every single kid to a calculus model, and then they say, gosh, if you take, financial literacy, you're not going to be on this particular track. We got to open it up. When I got here, only 38% of kids were taking 2 or more CTE classes. Today, 52% of graduates have done it. We've embedded financial literacy as an option for kids, but we take a beating for it if we don't have a context for it.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. So let's talk about the Parents' Rights Movement. Initiative 2081, which is the Parents' Bill of Rights, was passed by the legislature in January, but parts of that bill regarding student medical records and mental health records were recently struck down. And how do you feel about the spirit of the bill? Would you enforce it or ask for it to be amended, or would you push for repeal? So I believe, Chris, your turn.
Yeah, thank you. So this bill was in the works as an initiative from the state Republican Party. Obviously, there's a lot of passionate folks who genuinely believe in parents' rights, as I do, and if they had bill, we should double down and help parents understand all the places where they have existing rights and where new rights are conferred upon them. Anything that's in the official student record is a right of parents. But we warn districts, be careful in changing your guidance too quickly until it gets through the courts, because it's likely that there's medical privacy issues that are in violation here and some academic privacy for students. Within a week, a court agreed. So we're building right now the technical support for our districts to really double down on parents' rights where they have a right, and we're making sure that the courts clarify where students have a privacy protection, and we ought not step over the rights of students.
Thank you. David?
So I'm a strong believer that families are important in a quality education for their kids. 99.9% of parents love and support their kids, and they want to be actively involved in their kids and their lives, no matter what it is, whether it's academics or gender or whatever it might be. Parents want to be involved in those decisions. And the state legislature overwhelmingly bipartisan voted like almost 100% to pass that bill. Unfortunately, on June 5th, my opponent put out a press release telling all 295 school boards to ignore the new law. And so we have an elected senior executive of the state telling 1,500 elected school board members to disregard the newly passed bill. And I think that's really unfortunate. Sends a wrong message.
Okay, Chris, would you like to?
Yeah, please go look at the memo we put out to school districts. It's on our website. There's no remote idea that parents or school districts should ignore the law. What we said is you're going to be in violation of the law if you implement this wholly without hearing from the courts on the places where it clearly violates students' rights. The rest of it, go forward on. We've given technical assistance. It's important to protect parents' rights, but not step on students' rights. Don't ignore it. Wait until the courts settle it.
Thank you. So we do have a follow-up question to that. how much say should parents have in curriculum? You know, how do educators strike that balance between parents who don't want issues of equity and race to be discussed in the classroom, and you know, there are parents who believe that learning about these issues should be part of basic education. So, how do you know, what's the role of parents in curriculum? Chris?
This is such an awesome state to lead in, and I'm so grateful for our past lawmakers. They've set up a really good framework. Our office sets learning standards. We work with experts around the country and in the states to say, what should a fourth grader know in math or an eighth grader in reading? We at OSPI set learning standards, but curriculum is established by local school boards and lesson plans are delivered by teachers. And at that level, parents need enormous amounts of context and support and invitation, and good school boards invite them into those curriculum decisions. That is a local decision.
Thank you.
So my school district, and I would encourage all schools to do this, we have our entire curriculum online, so parents can go and see what their children are going to be learning up to more than 30 days in advance. So if there's something they want to opt their kids out of, they can choose to do so. My school district also has parents on all of our curriculum assessment committees. They work with students, parents, and teachers, and they work on that curriculum initiative, and then when they figure out what curriculum they want to pilot, they bring that to the school board for approval. So we're really proud that we have parents on that.
Thank you so much. Kellyanna?
Mr. Olson, a law passed earlier this year aims to make it harder to challenge books at school libraries. Do you support this measure, and should the state push back harder?
Can you say the first half? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Of course. A law passed earlier this year aims to make it harder to challenge books at school libraries. Do you support this, or do you think that the state should be pushing back harder?
No, I think I support that. We had a school board meeting just a couple of days ago, and we had members of our community come and thank us and applaud our school board for not doing that. I think that's a slippery slope. If you start doing that, it sets a very negative precedent. And I mean, you can choose not to check out a book and read it, but no, I do not support that. I think the librarian is responsible for that, and the community shouldn't step in there, no.
So are you saying that you do not support banning books?
No, I don't support that at all.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reykdal?
Yeah, obviously I don't support banning books. Our state has a process already, and local school boards adopt processes on book challenges. So if a parent says, I think that's 8th grade material and it's being taught to 5th graders, whether it's math or science or anything else, there's a local challenge process. What's gotten other states, I think, just horrendously off track is they've empowered their superintendents, backed by Moms for Liberty groups and these other organizations. They are out to ban books. And in other states, the state superintendent has the authority to say, we're banning that book in all districts. We don't do that in this state. The authority for books, materials is at the local level. There are processes for parents if they want to challenge the library book and question the age appropriateness of it. But that is something that's very sacred in our state. This office, despite some groups who want us to be banning books, should always stand for local control on this issue and never, ever banning those materials at the statewide level.
Thank you.
All right, let's talk about something that is being banned in some classrooms right now, cell phones in the classrooms. And David, you mentioned earlier your Peninsula School Board banned them from the classroom. There's a state plan in place to encourage districts to restrict them by 2025, put in place by Chris Reykdal. With some districts like North Shore already starting that, but what about security and emergency issues? Parents worry about having access to their kids. What is your overall thought of cell phones in the classroom? And Chris, let's start with you.
Yeah, the research has been really clear that cell phones in the classroom are quite distracting. A lot of it's not intentionally focused on instructional learning, as you might imagine if you have teens, as I still have one that's a teenager. Our whole entire concept here is we have enough research to know that this is very impactful. The research isn't actually clear that the strategies to mute those phones, put them in backpacks, put them in pouches is necessarily turning into better academic outcomes, but I think we are confident that will be the case. It's so new in our state and so new in other states. What we have watched local districts do as they've implemented this is they've engaged families and parents, and I think parents get very comfortable with the idea that the cell phone will be with my child or in a backpack. It just can't be active at the time, or if they put them in pouches, it's accessible in emergency. We went 130 years being able to contact our kids for dentist appointments, and we made it work by calling the front desk, and we're going to have to get back to that because it's important. I know time's out. We'll go to David, but I hope for a follow-up because it's not enough just to deal with phones in the classroom.
Well, I do have a follow-up there because we're dealing with something that we didn't deal with when we were kids, and that's dangers in the classroom, school shootings, that kind of thing. And I think a lot of parents want to be able to access their kids immediately, and by putting these in a pouch, and I know a lot of times these pouches are on a door frame away from the child, they feel like that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, and every district that's tried this, I think they've gotten to a really good place with parents, and not that many are doing pouches, but it can work. A lot of them, the policy is it has to be in your backpack and it can't be seen. And that way it is accessible if necessary, but it needs to be offered in a backpack. Again, I hope we get time on this, but it's not enough to deal with the classroom. We're actually changing learning standards, one of the only states in the country to take on information, media, and social media literacy, age appropriate, age 5 all the way to graduation. We got to go beyond cell phones and talk to students about the impact these are having on them.
Okay, thank you. David, your take on cell phones.
So again, we did this over a year and a half ago. Our school board 2 years ago saw that this was a student mental health crisis. It was impacting student discipline in the classroom, academic performance, student anxiety. We really felt we needed to get our hands around this. So we implemented this policy a year and a half ago, and we're really proud of that. It's sort of interesting that the superintendent just came out with his guidance 2 weeks ago on this when we were a state leader in this year and a half ago. But it's really important that we worked with our students and our teachers and our parents in developing our school cell phone policy. We didn't do it in a vacuum. That's why it didn't happen overnight. In an emergency, I would argue that you do not want the students on their phone talking if there's a shooter in the school, God forbid. They need to be listening to the teacher to execute their evacuation or whatever their emergency procedures are. And we leave them on, but they have to be on mute. They could check them at lunch.
Okay. Yeah. We're going to stick with school safety, and Kellyanna has a question.
Mr. Olson, lockdowns and shelter-in-place orders at school have become all too common. Some districts, like Seattle, have a limited school resource officer programs. What can the state do to make schools safer? As state superintendent, what role would you play in that?
I absolutely support school resource officers. Our school district, like a year ago, passed a safety, security, and technology levy so that we could add additional cameras and security to our schools. But we also hired armed school safety officers, former police officers that are in plain clothes patrolling the halls. A couple months ago, I was at a Juneteenth event at MLK on the June 19th, and I had some students that had gone to Garfield High School last year, and they lost friends in that shooting. And I told them what we do in our school district, and I asked them what they felt about it. They really liked the fact that they're undercover. They said they wouldn't want to be in uniform patrolling halls, but they said having armed undercover former police officers in the hall, they really liked that idea. So I think it's something that schools should consider, especially in light of what's going on.
Thank you. Mr. Reykdal?
Yeah, this is one where we've leaned into it at the state level through advocacy. I put a budget request forward to the legislature saying, take a comprehensive approach. It's not just about school resource officers, but that may be part of the solution if that's what local districts choose. It's a whole lot also about student mental health and supports. It's a combination of things. And we have threat assessment system, which we built out. So when we think there's a student in crisis who has the risk of hurting themselves or others, there are teams that can swoop in very, very quickly. It's a comprehensive team, folks in the community as well as folks in the school. And I think that's why we get some of the best outcomes in our state as a result of this. The legislature ultimately funded $300 million of that request, and we have more school counselors and nurses and school psychs in our buildings today. And some districts, like David's, have chosen that money to go the security route, which is a local choice for them. So we leave it up to locals, but you got to invest in the personnel.
19% of Washington State students have reported being bullied within their school experience. What tools and resources will you provide to combat this serious issue? Starting with you, Mr. Reykdal.
Well, it's about teaching, right? That's the beauty of this system. I think every great challenge we've ever faced is a combination of some regulatory work paired with teaching. You've got to lean into this question. So we've built a framework for this called social emotional learning. You cannot just deal with it after the fact. You've got to get on the front end of this. And it means doing intentional work with real experts, real PhDs who build social emotional curriculum from the earliest of ages, even pre-K. And you're teaching kids how to work with each other. You're asking them complicated questions around what will they do in the scenario in which they feel that they've been bullied. You're identifying resources for them, and you're teaching them the skills to interact with each other and ask for help. Social emotional learning has been criticized by folks in his political party. It's phenomenal to me, but it really matters for kids.
Thank you. Mr. Olson?
Unfortunately, bullying has been around for hundreds of years. I still remember my third grade bully, Andy Trimble. Okay, long time away, right? And a lot of this, as he says, cell phones and social media are really harming our children. And when they have them in class, they can be checking their phone and being bullied and body shamed during class, student anxiety. A lot of that can lead to student mental health issues and then they see things online that might exacerbate them. And so I agree 100%. We need to our school district just implemented a brand new HIB thing online so that when someone reports a suicidal thought or something, it goes immediately to the police so that we can report and act on it very quickly. So
thank you. This question wasn't necessarily about online bullying. How will you combat this issue within the schools directly?
Well, one of the things we have 2 student reps from every one of our high schools that sit on our school board, and we also have a superintendent student advisory committee. So we do routine check-ins with our students, and the student reps come to our board, and they give us really honest feedback on what's going on in our schools. It's very honest feedback, and we act on that. So I think oftentimes you have to change the culture in the school, and you have to be able to work with the students, not just the adults.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I follow up? Since you got to follow up.
Yep, 20 seconds.
This is about social emotional learning. It's about the skills and leaning into it. It's why it's not enough to just say, put your phones away during class time, because if they're at 6 hours in the evening at home on a phone where there's bullying, or in person at lunchtime, we have to teach students these skills. You can do it at the earliest of age that are age appropriate. We should not shy away from the idea that school can be a powerful place to teach kids how to be better human beings, not just our obsession with math tests and language tests.
Thank you.
All right, I want to talk about mental health quickly here, and Sammy West has a question for you.
Yeah, thank you. What role should schools play in providing students with mental health support, and how do they balance that with tough financial realities? David, you go first.
Well, this is it's an outstanding question. That's one of the reasons that our teachers are so overwhelmed. Now that they have inclusionary practices where all students with special needs, students with disabilities are in the general education classroom, and we don't get the special paraeducator support to help those teachers. Teachers are not trained to provide social and emotional support for those students other than caring about them. But the state, this goes back to prototypical funding. Our school district of 10,000 students is only allowed less than 1 school psychologist to deal with student mental health, but we pay 13. The extra 12 are from our levy. The state needs to help fix this by fully funding special ed so that school districts can help get more counselors and psychologists to help early identify students with mental health.
Thank you. Moving to you, Chris.
Well, David's done this twice now, and I have a lot of respect for my opponent. We've done a lot of these together, but he leans into this idea on every time we get a question about mental health, he goes to because students with disabilities are in general education settings. And I just want to be super clear to our disability community and our students, you are loved and you are supported, and it is not fair to say that the mental health crisis of our state, of our country, of our planet is because of students with disabilities in inclusionary settings. That said, we've built really important models around student mental health that include direct investment in schools for school psychs, resource and referral systems. We built the regional mental health networks in all 9 regions of our state. I did that with executive authority with federal emergency dollars. I asked the legislature to backfill it. They backfilled a quarter of it. So we will be back this year to fully fund those regional mental health systems. It is about investment.
And I would say that I'm offended by his comments because many of my nephews and nieces in my family are students with special needs. I didn't say that they aren't loved and supported. What I'm saying is that when they're in the general ed inclusive, which we believe is better for those students, and I agree with that, by the way, but when we don't have the paraeducator supports to help the teachers deal with the additional load that they have to do, I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that it's the students' fault. We need to give the teachers more supports to help with those students.
Okay. Let's move on to free school meals. Kellyanna.
Mr. Olson, free and reduced breakfast and lunch programs can be deemed as controversial among taxpayers. However, 27% of Washington students have reported that they cannot afford lunch or breakfast at school. Students perform better, get better test scores, and overall can stay more focused when they are well nourished. Will you try to get this implemented? How, and how will you also depoliticize this issue?
Well, students need to eat, okay? We already know that if students are hungry, they're not going to be paying attention to their teacher or to class. And so the federal government provides Title I money to help with students that are free and reduced lunch. We try and take the stigma off of it in our school district so no one knows if they're on free and reduced lunch. We don't ask them to show any ID. And so I think it's super critical that we make sure that no kid goes hungry during the day at school, and not asking questions, just make sure the kids have something to eat. I don't know why this is controversial at all. We need to make sure that our students, we have homeless kids in our school district, McKenty-Vento. We need to make sure that they feel welcome, and they need to be able to be fed to be better students.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I missed it, but how do you think what is the best way to depoliticize this issue?
I be honest with you, it's not a political issue in my school district. I haven't really heard that it is a political issue that we need to feed our kids. So I might be missing something, but in my school district, it's not a controversial issue at all. So maybe I'm missing the mark on this, but it's not an issue in my school district.
Thank you. Mr. Reykdal?
It has become a political issue, and it's ridiculous, but there are folks who say not the job of schools. And I don't think schools necessarily get to choose what their job is when kids, as you said in your question and so well researched, if they can't get nutrition, they don't feel safe, they don't get proper supports in their sort of holistic approach. The math and the science and the English and the social studies isn't going to matter much. So we leaned into this. When I got to OSPI, I said this is something we should tackle. I was one of the first superintendents in the country to say our goal should be 100% of meals. When I got there, only 300,000 kids were getting breakfast and lunch. Today, it's over 700,000 kids getting breakfast and lunch. And you asked specifically how to depoliticize it. Let me say to everyone in the audience and everyone watching, this is a tough time for inflation and food inflation. Families who tapped into this, the 700,000 of them, it's like a $1,000 tax break a year when their kids get nutritious breakfast and lunch at schools. It's a middle class
issue. Thank you, sir. I have a follow-up question real quick. Do you think that it's important to depoliticize this issue even if you're not personally seeing it within your district?
Yes, focus on kids, focus on learning, make it a whole child support where we generally share the cost of that between the federal government and state government, and understand that for some families, it is a massive boost to their survivability if collectively we can feed kids as they do all over Asia and all over Europe when they go to school. It really helps families and their income and their survivability.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. So, yeah.
We're just about out of time, so we have one last question for you both, and it's kind of ending on a positive note here. Can you point to a successful policy or program in your home district or any school in the state that you'd like to see expanded? Explain the benefit to the students, and Chris, will start with you in only 20 seconds.
Well, 20 seconds, lots of them. We've gotten to almost all districts on meals. Let's take it everywhere. We have 50,000 kids through the policy that we've initiated to get them dual language learning. They're learning to be bilingual from the age they start school. We've got that in 150 schools now, 50 districts, 50,000 kids. It is our goal that every parent in the state of Washington in their school district has at least one elementary school with a dual language choice. Let's go statewide with it.
All right, David?
One of the things we did is we really put a lot of emphasis on literacy, okay, especially working with dyslexic kids to make sure that our goal in my school district is 100% of all kids reaching the end of third grade can read. And so we created a literacy task force. We went around the state, brought in experts to develop science of learning, so we knew actually how we were teaching, not just trying to teach literacy, and we've had a great success with that. So I'd like to see literacy expanded across the state.
Okay, thank you so much. And that's all the time we have for questions. Now it is time for closing statements. So David, you went second during opening statements, so you will be first during closing, and you have 60 seconds.
Thank you. So first off, thanks again to City Club of Seattle for hosting tonight's debate, and thanks to Chris for a discussion on these important issues. During my opponent's tenure, we've seen over 100,000 fewer kids meeting grade level standards for English and math, student mental health crisis, doubling of absenteeism, and a failure to adequately fund special education. It's a good thing my opponent isn't a medical doctor, because he would have lost his medical license a long time ago. But simply put, our kids can't afford 4 more years of Chris Reykdal. We need a change. As superintendent, I will focus on student success, encourage parent involvement to improve learning and lower absentee rates, fully fund paraeducators, work to expand CTE programs, and ensure the state is meeting its constitutional duty to fully fund education. Please visit my website, electdavidolson.com, to learn more, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Chris, you have 60 seconds.
Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity. Thank you for being here. And those who are watching, we agree on a lot of things. We disagree on some really critical things. Mr. Olson's called DEI a joke, and tonight he said, but it's important. He said we should basically bankrupt all of our higher institutions to save America, because he was sort of pandering to an extreme group at the time. He opposes the capital gains tax that only 4,000 people are paying in the state, and it's providing $500 million to early learning and $300 million to rural school construction. He says we should fund the state with marijuana. Please do not try to do that, everybody. I didn't understand it until I went to his PDC, and 1 out of every $13 he's raised is from the marijuana industry. And so I think that's weird. It's not unethical. It's just you want to be the school superintendent. I don't think the motto should be more marijuana. It's like J.D. Vance weird, in my opinion. That's how weird it is. Test scores on the rise in recovery, record high graduation rates right now, even as students take more rigorous courses, remediation rates in colleges going down, fewer students needing help when they get there, CTE pathways opened up, more kids getting inclusionary practices, more kids getting advanced math and science. We are a state that has been doing wonderful things, but we've got a lot of work to do post-pandemic, and we have to be honest about our weaknesses.
Thank you so much.
Our strengths.
Thank you so much. That is time. And thank you both. We've come to the end of tonight's debate. We hope you learned something, and we certainly hope you vote. Election Day, of course, November 5th. You can register to vote online or by mail until October 28th. On behalf of the audience and all the families watching tonight, I'd like to thank our candidates for taking part in this discussion. Let's give them a round of applause, shall we? And thanks for being with us. I'm John Opperstead for Fox 13. Have a great night, everybody.